In the movie Guilty, this police officer was tired of being a 911 operator who picks just calls, but after handling this case his life changed forever. The movie begins as LAPD officer Joe Baylor is working the night shift at the 911 call center. He's getting calls from different people because there's a big fire burning in the city. Then, a man named Matthew Fontenot calls, saying he was robbed by a woman he was with, who turns out to be a prostitute. Joe gets the details about where it happened and what the woman looks like. While dealing with this, a journalist interrupts with a call wanting to interview him about a case. He tells her not to call again and hangs up. Just then, his supervisor, Sergeant Denise Wade, warns him about taking personal calls at work. Joe then calls the LAPD to send a police car to Fontenot's location. The person who answers happens to be his boss, Sergeant Bill Miller. After exchanging greetings, Joe asks if his former partner, Rick, was okay. His boss assures him Rick is fine. Joe gives him the details for sending help to Fontenot before ending the call to take a break. Taking a break, Joe tries to call his ex-wife but only gets her voicemail. He returns to his station and gets a call from Emily Lighton, a woman who's crying on the other end. She talks in code and short words. In the background he hears a man's voice. Realizing she's been abducted, he encourages her to pretend to talk to him as her child so she doesn't give herself away. Excusing himself, he arranges for a police unit to be sent to her location even though he doesn't have the exact details yet. The CHP dispatcher asks for a license number of the car used for her abduction, and Joe tries to get some information from Emily about the car. She tells him what she observed about the car and could remember, and mention that it is a white car, among other things. The woman hangs up after Joe asked a few more questions that can help their search. It looked like the abductor was approaching her. A police unit is immediately dispatched to search for the vehicle. Luckily they spot a white car, stopped it but realizes it's the wrong one because of the smoke from the fire. The CHP dispatcher tells Joe they can't do much without the plate number, which makes him furious. He vents his frustration. He tries to search for whatever information he could get about Emily. He finds a home number for Emily from the information she provided and he calls it. Luckily a small girl answers. She's Emily's daughter, Abby. On the call, the first thing Abby asked was, "Where is my mummy?" He asks Abby questions about her mom and dad. Abby talked and also tells him about her baby brother Oliver. To get more information, Joe asked her more questions, including her dad's name, as his instincts suspected something going on between the dad and the mom. While on the call, he hears her dialing some numbers, which he says was her dad's number. He asks her to repeat it, and he writes it down. Using the number, he finds information about her dad and gets his car plate number. He asks if her dad lives with her, and she says she only visits him. Then he promises to bring her mom back home to her. He advises her to go stay with her brother, who she says is asleep. The baby girl mentioned that she's scared and he assures her he'll send officers to her house to take care of her and her brother. He tells her his name and to call 911 if she needs help before their call ends. Manny, his colleague sitting nearby, asks what the problem was, but Joe rudely tells him to mind his business. Suddenly, Joe stands up and asks everyone working if they received a call from Emily, but no one did. He calls back the CHP dispatcher to report the information he found and asks her to send a unit to Emily's house to check on the kids. They argue because Joe insists on sending a unit to the kids first, while she insists on getting the plate number. She gets her way, and then she ends the call. Feeling disturbed by other officers staying close to him, Joe asks Manny if he can continue his work in another office, and Manny agrees. Joe moves to a new office to work. He gets help from Sergeant Bill to dispatch officers to Emily's location. Joe also tries to get Sergeant Bill to send officers to Henry's house too, as his instincts feel something is wrong, and it is connected to the husband, but Sergeant Bill refuses, telling Joe to stand down. He understands Joe's situation and that Joe is trying to help in every possible way and fast, but explains that they can't go to Henry's place without a warrant. He emphasizes it's not Joe's job to do all this and reminds him about his court hearing he has the next day, advising him to focus on that instead and leave the case to them. Sergeant Bill sends his regards to Jess before ending the call. Having an asthmatic attack, Joe uses his inhaler. He tries calling Emily's phone again to see if she would pick, but it goes to voicemail. Then, he calls his ex-wife as he really needed to talk to someone. She reminded him that they'd been separated for 6 months, and can't just keep disturbing her when he wants. Joe just wants to talk to his daughter, but his ex-wife tells him she's asleep. He tries to make small talk, but she's not interested. He asks about his partner Rick, and although she doesn't want to respond, she eventually tells him what he wants to hear. He also asks if she'll come to his hearing, but she gets annoyed and hangs up. Joe then calls Henry's number, pretending not to know he's with his ex. Henry denies seeing Emily, but Joe knows it's a lie. He angrily confronts Henry, knowing he's with Emily, and demands to know where he's taking her. Henry hangs up on him. Joe calls his partner Rick, and they discuss Joe's hearing the next day with Rick being a witness. Rick is worried because FBI agents visited his house, fearing he might say something wrong in court. Joe reassures him, then he asks Rick for help to check out Henry's apartment. Sergeant Wade comes to the office to inform Joe of Abby, the baby girl's call. The girl called to say there are some men on the door. Joe instructs Abby to open the door for them as they were police officers who came to help her. So she does. One of the officers, Tim, takes the phone from Abby and informs Joe that Abby has blood stains on her. Tim then searches for Oliver, her little brother, but found that Oliver is no longer breathing, and so he immediately calls for medical assistance. As he was doing this, the call ends abruptly, making Joe nervous. Just then, Manny comes to the office to tell Joe their shift is over, but Joe decides to stay longer, which worries Manny because of Joe's health and his court case the next day. But Joe reassures him that he is good before he leaves. Joe angrily calls Henry back, accusing him of hurting the little kid Oliver. He tells Henry to stop his criminal act and says he will send help, but also informs him that he'll be going to jail for all of this. Rick informs Joe he's outside Henry's apartment, and Joe instructs him to break in. Now in the house, Rick finds a lot of unread letters and tells Joe about it. Emily calls Joe back, and he instructs her to apply the vehicle's handbrake if she is still in the car. This is so the Polika searching around may notice this. The vehicle seems to crash, and the call gets cut, but this way Joe now gets a location that the police officers can track. Joe tries calling her back, but it doesn't connect. A distraught Emily calls back, saying their plan didn't work, and she doesn't want to die. Joe holds her call and contacts the CHP dispatcher to give Emily's location. He switches back to Emily, who tells him that Joe has just placed her at the back of the van because of what she did. Joe advises Emily to find anything she can defend herself with in the trunk. Luckily, she finds a brick. He tells her to hit Henry with it if she gets the chance. Emily says she's scared, so Joe helps her regulate her breathing and talks to her about what she loves doing with her kids. She mentions going to an aquarium, and even invites Joe to come along next time, saying she likes him. The van stops, which makes Emily hysterical again. Joe tells her to hit Henry when he opens the door because he deserves it. She tells Joe about snakes being in Oliver's stomach, making him cry restlessly, and that she was trying to make it better. This catches Joe's attention. He asks Emily if she was the one who hurt Oliver, but before she can answer, Henry opens the door, and Emily hits him as Joe had instructed. Joe hears the noise and then sudden silence. He gets a call from Rick, who tells him about Emily being admitted to a psychiatric hospital before. Joe is barely able to respond due to shock. He calls Henry, asking where Emily is. Henry doesn't know and is distraught. Joe blames him for not informing him that Emily had hurt Oliver, so the police could have helped her. Henry explains that Emily is sick and couldn't afford her medication, leading to Oliver's death. He cries for his son's death, but Joe reassures him that Abby is with the police and safe. However, Henry insists on going to Abby. He warns Joe that Emily doesn't know she hurt Oliver and might harm herself if she realizes. Again, the call abruptly ends. Joe is informed that Emily wants to talk to him, and the call is transferred. He asks her where she is, but she talks about wanting to find Oliver and Abby to take them to the aquarium. Joe asks her where she is, but she won't reveal her location, and just keeps talking about her kids. Just then, she looks at her body and realizes there's blood on her, causing distress. Joe tries to calm her down, but she doesn't listen. He realizes she's about to jump from an overhead bridge. Joe urgently calls for police cars to be sent to the bridge, and tells Emily he blames himself for everything that happened. Joe tells Emily that Abby is waiting for her to come home, but Emily insists she's going to be with Abby and Oliver. To make Emily feel better and not too bad about herself, Joe confesses to Emily that he killed a 19-year-old boy out of anger. This grabs her attention. He tries to explain why but struggles to make sense. He tells her he can't let her die, crying as he recalls his promise to Abby that she would come home and reminds Emily she has people who love her. In the distance, police sirens are heard. Joe urges Emily to go to the police officers. She says she's going to meet Oliver and Abby, and then the call ends. Joe tries calling her again, but it doesn't connect. However, the CHP dispatcher informs him that they have gotten Emily and she is safe with them, bringing immense relief to him. Sergeant Wade comes to the office to inform Joe that the baby Oliver is alive and receiving treatment in the ICU. This surprises Joe because he thought Oliver was dead. He goes to the restroom and vomits, then sits on the floor, looking at his daughter's picture. He calls Rick and tells him to tell the truth when he's called to the stand in court. Rick refuses, knowing it could ruin Joe's life, but Joe makes him swear to do so. Joe cries while talking to his partner Rick. Then, he calls the reporter Catherine Harbour, who has been trying to get his side of the story. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. I would also appreciate a comment because it helps like you can't even imagine. It's a new channel and every bit of support counts.